Carly Fiorina, great to have you.
Good morning, John. How are you?
Oh, my goodness. Lots going on. We got to go rapid fire. I don't know where to start. Okay, number one, I was the only person in Trump's orbit on TV, on CNN, on Thursday and Friday to call for Scaramucci to get fired. I thought his comments he made to the New Yorker were despicable. I didn't think he could remain credible. I don't think you can say that when you're representing the leader of the free world and the U.S. government. A lot of other people defending him, a lot of talking points nonsense. Trump fired him on Monday. Right thing, wrong thing, why?
Oh, right thing. Absolutely right thing. And you were right in your comments on Thursday and Friday that his position was untenable. He could not remain. Of course, my issue is he never should have been brought into the White House in that position in the first place. He was never qualified. He may be a great hedge fund manager, but that doesn't make him qualified, and that became all too clear all too quickly. So thank goodness he's gone. General Kelly, I am hoping, will be a great chief of staff. I say I'm hoping not because I doubt that General Kelly has the capability to be a great chief of staff, but President Trump needs to let him be a great chief of staff, and that means he's got to be in control. We have talked about this before, John. I've said many, many times, as have you, that alignment of purpose, common goals, and clarity in the chain of command is critical to achieve success. And so General Kelly, I hope now, is in a position where the chain of command is clear, and he can help the president establish alignment in objectives and common purpose. But the president has to be prepared to let him achieve those things.
What were those three things you mentioned again? I got two of them. Alignment of purpose.
Okay, you have to have alignment of purpose and common goals, not competing factions, common goals, which are hopefully focused on solving problems for the American people. And you have to have clarity in the chain of command. What's the decision-making process?
Those would be the three things you need to have any business venture or venture at all successful, right?
Well, that's correct. And that's, last time you and I talked, you said, well, President Trump has had experience with creating competing power factions in his real estate business, and that seemed to work for him. And I said, yes, apparently it did. I've never seen that work in any other setting. In my experience, whether it's government policy shops or nonprofits or for-profits, you need fundamentally alignment of purpose, common goals, and clarity in the chain of command. Without those things, you cannot succeed.
Well, you know what? The fiefdoms he's allowed to foster, and, he's responsible for this. These little power centers and all the nonsense that has gone on there, he's responsible for setting this up. It's failed him miserably. Now he's got an adult in the room. And I think hopefully, look, General Kelly is a 4-star Marine general, right? You don't get there by pussyfooting around. So I don't think he'll stay in the job if he can't get it done his way. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But if there's anybody, I think, that can end the romper room garbage that goes on in there, which distracts from the goals, the message, and everything else, it's General Kelly. So I'm optimistic, and Scaramucci had to go. I mean, that guy's just a complete creep, and I was happy to see him go. And it was very disturbing for me to turn. I watch CNN because I'm on the network, obviously, and all the other people, the surrogates in Trump orbit other than me, virtually read the White House talking points verbatim in defending him. And I just couldn't believe it. And my thing is, as a Trump supporter, Carly, at some point, you just got to draw a line in the sand of human decency. And if you simply excuse...
John, I think it's so important
Am I right?
You said that. And I think it's so true. And, of course, you had surrogates doing what the White House asked them to do through Sunday night, defending Scaramucci, and the next day he was fired. That's happened over and over and over again as well, where something will be defended and then there's a course correction and all the surrogates are left twisting in the wind. But you are right. At a certain point, we've talked about this too, principles matter. Mm-hmm. Character counts. Mm-hmm. There is such a thing as acceptable and not acceptable. And it doesn't matter who's in the White House or what party's in control. Principles matter. Character counts. There is acceptable and there is unacceptable. And we all need to remember that.
And as a Trump supporter and part of what you would call his base, which is me and many of our listeners, not all, but many of our listeners would be part of the Trump base. My thing is, you got to hold the president accountable to his promises, to what he says. And, we give him a lot of slack because he is who he is, and he's, kind of a funny guy, and we get all that. But you got to draw a line, because if you simply defend everything that anybody does in there, the base is going to crack, and when that happens, he's done. He has nothing else.
Well,
Can't do it.
George, maybe I've said this to you before, John, but George Washington, our first president, gave a farewell address to the nation. 1789, September, and in that farewell address he said this: "The problem with political parties is over time they will become so consumed with winning, they will forget about principles and values in governing." That is what we have to be careful about, because let's face it, both the Democrat Party and the Republican Party frequently are consumed by winning. The problem is winning for winning's sake, winning the news cycle, winning the next election, winning, doesn't actually solve people's problems. It doesn't make things better for the American people, which is why Americans are tired of politics. It's why, in many ways, Trump got elected, because people said this isn't working. But we can't let it happen every single time. There is something that matters beyond winning the news cycle or the next election.
Like you said, principle matters, character counts. Here's the good news. The president did the right thing.
Absolutely.
I'm glad he made this decision.
And he appears to be setting up Kelly to succeed.
Yeah,
and
I
that's
think so.
Really great. And, ultimately they're going to have to answer the question about the family members. It's not that President Trump is the first person to hire family. It's just that, the old adage is never hire somebody you can't fire. Family can't be fired. So the issue is, how does all that work? And time will tell.
Well, it's a step in the right direction. There's no question about it. And look, the president made a terrible decision with Scaramucci. I kind of got why he gave it a shot. He took a shot. It blew up in his face. But sometimes you just make bad decisions and you got to cut bait. You just got to cut bait and just cut it.
Move
and
on.
Say, I made a bad decision and I'm getting out. And he did that. So let's move on. So talking about moving on, healthcare, big epic fail again on Friday, 2 a.m. John McCain voting the reconciliation down, which infuriated many of us because McCain made a ridiculous speech about how we need to have a debate, and then he voted so we wouldn't have a debate, which shocked me. Where do we go now?
Well, you might not be surprised. No, I have a slightly different vision of what John McCain did. I think what John McCain was calling for was a return to regular order. While that's a pipe dream, perhaps, it is the right objective in my view. But look, again, you and I have had this conversation for many months. You're never going to get health care through unless there is a clear, compelling case presented to the American people about what the Republican Party's solution is and why it is better than the problems we currently have. And that case was never made. It was never made by the president. It was never made by Mitch McConnell. Paul Ryan kind of tried to make it. The case was never made. And as we now know, Republicans, sadly to me, have made all the same mistakes Democrats made. The mistakes Democrats made when they passed Obamacare, they passed it aggressively on purely partisan lines, so they immediately undercut support for it, but they never explained it. People voted on it without knowing what was in the bill. Well, guess what? Our party did exactly the same thing. They determined to pass it with completely Republican support. Okay, maybe they were forced to, but what they were not forced to do was refuse to spend the time to build the case for the American people and, frankly, to build the case with certain senators. And so, leadership is about problem solving. You can't solve problems unless you build support for the solution. And while everyone was arguing about the votes, nobody was building support for the solution. And so whatever it was they were proposing, and I'm not clear what it was, are you? The American people didn't like it. And so these senators had no reason to just vote because Mitch McConnell told them to.
Carly, so look, the Republicans had no plan. They never had a plan that made any sense that anybody could understand.
Shocking, really, after 7 years?
After 7 years. So here's my question. There was a bunch of these senators that ran on repealing and replacing Obamacare, raised money on it. They got through 3 cycles on it, 2010, 12, 14, 16. No, they got 10, 12, 14. They got through 4 cycles on it, right? Raising money on repeal, on replace. They had a plan. They had no plan. Did they lie?
You see, I think what we're seeing is why people are so cynical about politics and tired of it. Of course they ran on it. That is the nature of our modern politics. Sadly, it is not about leadership. It is not about problem solving. It is about winning. Say what you have to say to win. Say what you have to say to raise the money. The problem is people are figuring out, it's why they're so frustrated. I've quoted this statistic before. 80% of the American people think politicians care more about themselves than the people they represent. And we have evidence over and over and over and over again. President Trump was not clear about what he really wanted in this repeal and replace bill. He also went back and forth, let it die, repeal only, repeal and replace. The House bill is too mean. So no one really knew where he stood. But you're absolutely right. Politicians said what they needed to say to raise the money and get reelected. And unfortunately, conflict raises money. Demonizing your opponent raises money. Promising the moon raises money, but it doesn't solve problems.
So you're right, because they did profit off it, but they had no plan. You're also 100% right, and I've been very critical of the administration on this, is that they never led this plan, and the president showed very little policy leadership other than get me something to sign. You know, that's not a policy. And so unlike tax reform, where they rolled it out the right way, I was there at the press briefing with Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Gary Cohn. They put out a one-pager, double-spaced, 2 sides, and said, these are the 12 principles that we're going to fight for massive tax reform in our lifetime. Right? Now, that's leadership, right? You're going to have to negotiate those.
That's right.
But they never did that with health care.
We're going to explain them. We're going to stand behind them. And let us hope, John, let's move quickly on to tax reform. And let's force the Democrats, hopefully in a positive way. Democrats have been saying for 10 years there is bipartisan support for tax reform. Mm-hmm. So let's go test that. Let's go try and get some Democrats to support this tax reform.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get to Russia. The Russian Federation kicking out up to 100 U.S. diplomats, closing one of the compounds, shutting down their barbecue pit by the lake where they were having a good time. They're in retaliation for the sanctions. Look, we didn't like what they did. We kicked their diplomats out. We seized compounds. I mean, does this matter?
Well, yes, I think it matters. I think, look, let's understand 2 things. Again, not a change in what you and I have talked about before. Russia is not our ally. Russia is our adversary. Russia is a bad actor. They are a bad actor in Europe. They are a bad actor in the Middle East. They are a bad actor in the United States when they mess with our cyber infrastructure, okay? They're not our ally. On the other hand, it's also true that they are relatively weak. Their economy is weak. Their military is relatively weak. So sanctions hurt them a whole lot more than them throwing a few of our people out, although it's obviously not helpful. Third, the reason Putin will not get off the sanctions that we have placed on them is because what those sanctions really do is prevent Putin and the oligarchs, and you are not wealthy in Russia unless Putin allows you to be wealthy. Those sanctions prevent Putin and his rich friends from hiding money and from moving money. In other words, it hits them where it really counts. And that is why he has been on a campaign for so long to try and get these sanctions removed. It's why there's so much talk about the Magnitsky Act, adoptions were an interesting retaliation, but the Magnitsky Act is one of those things that prevents these people from moving their money around. That's why Putin is going to stay on this, because it hurts him and his friends where it really counts, in their pocketbooks.
Okay, so that's really what's driving this. Now, the Russians amassing 100,000 troops on their easternmost border by the Baltics. Look, Carly, as you know, I'm not a warmonger. I went out of all these wars, so we're not on the same page on that. And that's fine.
I'm not a warmonger either.
I was against all the wars, including the first one. And I got kicked out of the Republican Party for that stance on multiple. I've been kicked out of more parties on the Republican side than you can imagine for my stance on wars and on pro-gay rights back when it was a very unpopular. But look, they're amassing 100,000 troops at the border. It's their own territory. It's within the Russian Federation. So what's the difference if they move troops from one area to some other area? That would be like criticizing us because we put 100,000 troops in Texas. Who cares?
Well, not exactly. Because we have a track record of behavior. And in the past, when they have amassed troops, they've annexed Crimea. They took over part of Georgia. They went into Ukraine. They have a history of aggression. And we know that Vladimir Putin's strategic objective is to restore the Soviet Union to its former empire, which means taking territory. And what Vladimir Putin is counting on, and what he got from President Obama, is no response. What he got actually from George Bush was no response when he went into Georgia, but Obama took it further and said, ooh, you don't like the missile defense system, let me take it down from Poland. Trump has made the right call. Trump is putting that defense system back into Poland. He is massing troops. Vice President Pence is in that part of the world trying to reassure our allies. All of those, in my opinion, are the right steps, because ultimately Russia is a weak nation. They cannot stand a direct confrontation, but they've gotten this far because no one will confront them.
So if you were in the U.S. Senate in 2019, you would be advocating that we take a very tough stand against the Russian Federation. Is that what I've heard?
Well,
on a number of
what
fronts.
You're hearing is, and again, don't just jump over these big, important elections that are happening right now in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And, you know, in some ways the governor's mansion is more immediately impactful to the lives of Virginians than anything else right now. But what I would be advocating for, what I have advocated for as a private citizen, the sanctions bill that passed overwhelmingly in the House and the Senate was absolutely the right thing. It is a strong signal, and it continues to tie the hands and freeze the money of Putin and his oligarchs, which makes their bad behavior more difficult. And secondly, I am completely supportive of what Trump has already done, which is to say, yep, we're going to put the missile defense system back in Poland. Yep, we're going to conduct military exercises in territories friendly to us that are right on your border. Yep, we're going to arm the Ukrainians. I've been advocating that for years now. We will confront your bad behavior.
So, Carly
that doesn't
Fiorina,
mean going to war, by the way. It doesn't mean going to war.
I get you.
But it does mean telling the Russians, because I believe the Russians understand they cannot go to war.
Right.
But it does mean telling the Russians in no uncertain terms there are consequences to your aggressive behavior. And the consequences are the United States is strengthening its relationships in neighboring countries to Russia.
Right.
The United States is making it more difficult for the Russians to maneuver in energy markets and to move money around, and all those are good consequences for them to contemplate.
All right. Well, based on that, I think we need you in the U.S. Senate. No question.
But you disagree with all of it, John.
Yeah, but I like your line. You know what? Just because I disagree with parts of what you're saying, I like the fact that you've thought this through, right? So, and the thing is, Carly, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And
yes,
I try to take your point of view. I don't agree with it, but I try to understand it. That's how you grow.
Well, you know, John, and by the way, I want to compliment you on that, because I do think one of the things that we have lost too often in our civil discourse is civility. Civility actually matters. Politicians on both sides have been demonizing their opponents, in my opinion, for way too long. Just because somebody disagrees with you, even a Democrat, may I say, doesn't make them evil or stupid or venal.
Right.
President Obama would, every time a Republican would disagree with him, he would basically say, well, they're either stupid or venal or evil. And Republicans do it as well. It doesn't help. So to disagree without being disagreeable, to be civil and kind to one another, to actually have to think through an issue before you talk about it, these are all actually good and important things.
Well, and to have a conversation, because, you can change minds. That's why you have debate, in order to influence and change your mind. So if you have a good argument and you're open-minded, you got to be able to consider all sides. And look, from my perspective, I was adamantly against the first war. I thought there was no reason for us to go into Kuwait. We had no allegiance with them. They were not part of NATO. I thought that was a Saudis issue. It all stemmed from that. Turned out I was right. Second war, there were no WMDs. That was a complete myth. So, I've got that. But look.
Yes, you do. You do.
I was right on that, and I was also right on gay rights. I was a pro-gay rights Republican 30 years ago.
You've been right about a lot of things, John.
I know. And that doesn't mean that I don't have an open mind to other things. So I'm taking into consideration what you're saying, and I'm going to evaluate it, because I know you're a very smart lady. That's why I think you should run for the U.S. Senate, because you would dramatically elevate the debate in Virginia for that race dramatically. That's why I'm anxious to see you get in. I'm out of time, though. I want to thank you for being with us. More information, CarlyFiorina.com, CarlyFiorina.com. Carly, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, John. Take care. Have a great day.